Frederick Douglass escaped slavery in 1838, and in the book he wrote about his life, he says he became free 4 years earlier, in the summer of 1834. Not on the road north, still a slave. Still 4 years from the 1838 escape that would finally carry him out. On a Maryland farm, one Monday before dawn, a 16-year-old locks his hands around the throat of the man hired to break him. He is not saying the escape did not matter. He is saying it came second. So which is freedom? The day you get your liberty or the day you get yourself back? Douglass has an answer, and it is stranger than either. This is the story of a boy who was turned into a brute, and the 2 hours in a cow yard that turned him back. To understand the fight, you have to understand what it interrupted. On the 1st of January, 1834, Douglass, around 16, was hired out for a year to a man named Edward Covey. Covey was poor. He worked rented ground with rented hands, and he had a reputation that did his money's work for him. The slaveholders of the district knew him as the man who could take a spirited young slave and give him back broken. And because that reputation was worth so much, other slaveholders let him hire enslaved workers like Frederick for almost nothing. Douglass understood the whole economy of it. He came to see himself in Covey's oxen, both property, both there to be broken. And the breaking was not only the whip, though the whip came every week. It was the labor, from dark to dark, and beneath it a cruelty with a design. On one of his first days, Covey sent the boy into the woods behind a team of wild, unbroken oxen. They bolted, dragging the cart, smashing through trees and stumps, while he waited every second to be crushed. And for surviving it, he was beaten anyway. That was the pattern Douglass describes. The work was built to fail, and the failure earned the lash, week after week, until the failing and the flogging were the whole of a life. And it worked. This is the part we would rather not hear about Frederick Douglass. For 6 months, the man who would become a great voice of American freedom was, on his own account, destroyed. He names the bottom of it in a single line. Douglass wrote, quote, "Behold a man transformed into a brute," end quote. Not treated like a brute, transformed into one. The reading stopped. The spark in his eye went out. What Covey was being paid to produce, on Douglass's telling, was not an obedient body, but an emptied mind. The system never wanted mere obedience. It wanted the will itself, and it hired a specialist to go and take it. Which is why the first answer that comes to mind is the incomplete one. Freedom must be escape, the North, getting out. True as far as it goes, but the boy in front of us has been hollowed, and there is nowhere yet for him to run. The turn comes in August. Douglass collapses in the field under the summer sun, and Covey opens a gash in his head with the hickory slab, and the boy walks miles, bleeding, to beg his owner for a different master, and is sent back the next morning. He slips past Covey, who springs at him from a fence corner as he steps back into the field and hides in the woods. And that night, a fellow slave named Sandy, a friend who thought well of him, finds him there in the dark, half-starved, and takes him home. The house belongs to Sandy's wife, a free woman, and near midnight, a fire is built there and an ash cake baked for him, a real risk taken to feed a man on the run. Before he leaves, Sandy hands him a root, tells him to wear it on his right side, and swears no white man can whip a man who carries it. Douglass, who reads and reasons, thought the root pure superstition. He carried it anyway. And he never quite says it did nothing. If the will that stood up to Covey the next morning was steadied, the night before, by a friend's fire and a friend's root, then the freedom Douglass is about to call his own act was never quite his alone. Monday, before dawn, Covey grabs him by the leg to tie him, and this time the boy does not fold. He takes the slave breaker by the throat. It runs 2 hours, from the stable out into the cow yard. He does not lose. He draws Covey's blood, and at one point throws the man full length to the ground, and by his own account, does it without meaning to do real harm. Toward Covey, his aim was never to injure, only to keep from being injured, to parry and hold and give almost nothing back. When Covey's cousin Hughes ran in to help, Douglas did strike, a blow and then a kick that sent Hughes staggering away in pain. But the man he had come to fight, he mostly just refused to let win. And he was not alone that morning. Covey ordered Bill, an enslaved man hired to Covey, but protected by an owner who forbade his beating, to help subdue him. And Bill answered that he had been hired to work, not to whip Frederick. He ordered Caroline, an enslaved woman who had come to milk, to take hold, and she flatly refused, though her risk was worse than Bill's, since Covey owned her and could do as he pleased, and he struck her for it. 2 people Covey ordered to help break a boy looked at him and said no. Douglas calls that morning an open rebellion. At last, Covey let go, puffing and blowing, and told him he would not have whipped him half so hard if he had not resisted. What Covey would not say is what Douglas records dryly. He had not really whipped him at all. And in the 6 months Frederick had left under him, Covey never raised a hand to him in anger again. Was it just a lucky brawl? A cornered boy who landed a few blows before a grown man quit? Douglas answers that, and not by claiming a knockout. He calls it a victory, and then defines winning in the strangest possible way. Not that he beat the man, that he kept the man from beating him. He marks the change in one line. Douglas wrote, quote, "I was nothing before. I was a man now," end quote. His legal condition had not moved an inch. Still owned, still on the farm, still 4 years from the escape that would finally work. What moved was inside him. The will slavery had spent 6 months prying loose came back. And Douglas insists that its return was the event itself, the root of the thing, and not only a step on the way to it. Freedom in this book does not begin at a border. It begins here, with a will that refuses. Which is a beautiful claim, and the book is going to make him pay for it, because a will can refuse, and the body it lives in is still owned, still worth money, still with no safe road anywhere. The obvious objection is a deadly one, and Douglas reaches it before you do. Resistance could be answered with death. He says it plainly. The law of Maryland assigned a hanging to a slave who resisted his master. His own plea to his owner, Thomas Auld, for a gentler master had already failed. Auld waving it off. No danger. Covey being by his lights a decent, hard-working, church-going sort. And, not by accident, the year was half gone, and pulling Frederick out early meant forfeiting the year's wages Auld stood to collect. So why did 2 hours of open revolt end in silence instead of on a rope? Douglas admits he could never fully explain it. His best guess is not courage. It is the economics again. He suspects that Covey was, quote, probably ashamed to have it known and confessed that he had been mastered by a boy of 16, end quote. A slave breaker who could be beaten by a 16-year-old and have it get around would wreck the very reputation that let him hire his hands so cheap. Covey's pride and his profit told him to swallow the whole thing in silence. So the fight survived, Douglas thinks, not because resistance is safe, but because this one tyrant could not afford to punish it. That is narrow and private and closer to luck than to law. He will not sand that down, because the same nerve, without Covey's private reason to look the other way, was exactly what the hanging law was written for. The fight did not invent Douglas the organizer. Even before Covey, at St. Michael's, he had gathered enslaved people into a Sabbath school until a mob, two church class leaders named Fairbanks and West, and his own master among them, rushed the meeting with sticks and other missiles and shut it down. One of them sneering that the boy was bent on turning into the next Nat Turner, and that if he kept it up, he would catch as many bullets as they claimed Turner had. What the fight changed was not that he worked with others. It was what he believed he was while doing it. And in the year that follows, you can watch him read the machinery of his own captivity more clearly than before. After Covey, in the Christmas days just before he starts at Freeland's, he sets down one of his sharpest readings of the whole system. Take the holidays themselves. Douglas argues that slaveholders use them as machinery, a controlled release of the pressure that might otherwise become revolt. He calls these holidays, quote, conductors or safety valves to carry off the explosive elements inseparable from the human mind when reduced to the condition of slavery, end quote. The tell is what got encouraged. Wholesome rest was quietly discouraged while drunken, degrading sport was pushed on them. So the days off drained away exactly the energy that might otherwise have turned to revolt. And against that machinery, in the year at Freeland's, he builds the real thing in secret. A Sabbath school that grows in a borrowed room to more than 40 scholars learning to read under threat of the lash. Then, first alone, then drawing in the men he trusted most, a plan to run. He took the vow himself in 1836 and brought the others in and claimed the whole plot as his own, the one who set it moving and kept it alive. And it failed. They believed they had been betrayed, though Douglas never proved by whom. They were seized, tied together, fastened to horses, and marched off to the Easton jail. And they knew what a failed escape could cost: torture, sail to the deep South, the slow death Douglas names in the rice swamps and the sugar fields. And look again at what the slaveholders let pass and what they crushed. The drunken holiday sport they encouraged. The reading they broke up with the mob. The dissipation was safe. The literacy was the danger. Sent back to Baltimore after the jail, Douglas is put into the shipyards, and there, the self-ownership the fight woke up finally finds its language. It does not arrive gently. A gang of white apprentices, enraged at black hands at the trade, set on him and beat him badly while a yard full of white men watch, some of them shouting to kill him. When it is over, no case can be brought. The magistrate will not so much as issue a warrant without a white man willing to swear to what he saw, and not one of the white men who watched will. And Douglas's own word, a black man's against white men, that court would not hear at all. At least 50 men saw it, and a beaten body and the victim's own account add up, in that court, to nothing. And later, hired out for wages he never gets to keep. Week after week, he hands his full pay to a man who did none of the work. He starts asking the plainest question there is: why? He writes, quote, "The right to take my earnings was the right of the robber," end quote. Not a master's right, not the law's right, a robber's, backed by nothing but the power to take. Douglas has an image for it. One crevice, one drop that falls through it, and the whole chain rusts away. The drop, in his telling, is a man learning the true name of the thing being done to him. So, on the 3rd of September, 1838, he goes. And the book refuses the easy ending in both directions at once. Douglas will not tell you how he escaped, withholding the route, the method, even whether anyone helped him, on purpose, so that no slaveholder could read his book and shut the door on the next person coming, or trace the way back to anyone who did help. That silence tells you the escape was no small thing. It was dangerous. It was real. It was liberty seized in the world. But it was not the beginning of his freedom. It was the fruit of it. The root had gone into the ground 4 years earlier, in a cow yard, when a boy who had been turned into a brute decided he was a man. So the book leaves us holding two facts it refuses to reconcile. In 1834, on Covey's farm, Douglas says he became a free man in everything but the law, while on paper he stayed property. And after 1838, having reached the North, he was still a fugitive by law, exposed to arrest, not legally free until friends bought his freedom outright, years later, in a story that belongs to the next part. Between those two facts sits the whole argument. If the freedom that counts is the inward one, the will that refuses, then it came before the law and before the escape. But it came at terrible risk and never by nerve alone. And Douglas is too honest to pretend otherwise, because he has just shown you the price of that nerve for almost everyone else: the hanging law, the betrayed plot, the swamps. He knows his own blow only landed through a tangle of things he did not control: food and sleep at a friend's fire, a Sunday's hard resolve, a tyrant Douglas believed was too proud to publicize the defeat afterward, an enslaved man who found him in the woods, a hired man, and a woman Covey enslaved, who both refused to hold him down. His freedom was seized, and it was also handed to him by other people at their own risk. And though Douglas admits that afterward he sometimes itched to bait Covey into a rematch, the blow that actually remade him was the defensive one, the refusal, not the attack. He closes the fight chapter not on a boast, but with 2 lines of Byron, quote, "Hereditary bondmen, know ye not? Who would be free themselves must strike the blow," end quote. So, back to that question we opened with, the liberty or the man? Here is where it leaves you. If Douglas is right, the fight was the truer emancipation, and legal safety, when it finally came not from the law relenting, but from friends paying his price. But if a freedom that leaves your body owned and your road watched is finally just a private dignity, then striking the blow is necessary, and it is not enough. A will can refuse and still be sold south by morning. The fight is freedom, or freedom as the door the fight alone could not open. That is what my bondage and my freedom puts in your hands, and it does not take it back.